Salutations everyone, Shadowtaurus here, back with another video. Now recently the Avatar Netflix series has come out and honestly, it's not that bad. Now obviously it has some problems, but overall I don't think it's that bad. But then that got me thinking about Avatar The Last Airbender and Avatar Legend of Korra, and so I made up my mind that I decided on a topic. And today's topic for the video is, could Avatar Aang survive The Legend of Korra? But before we get into the Avatar scaling, make sure to like the video, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the channel. Also click the notification bell to know when I upload, and finally, check out my Patreon for some awesome rewards and to help support the channel. Now, this topic is rather interesting as there's so much back and forth between the matchup of Avatar Aang versus Avatar Korra. However, I never see anyone compare their villains and see how each avatar would stack up against the other's villains. So that's what we'll be doing in this video. So let's set the stage for this, shall we? Now, I have not read all of the Avatar The Last Airbender comics or the Legend of Korra comics, so we'll be using Avatar Aang at the end of season 3, and he will be going up against each of the villains in order from weakest to strongest, though this order is my own personal opinion. And if you want me to make a full video on if Korra could survive Avatar The Last Airbender, or on the strength order of all the Avatar villains from weakest to strongest, let me know. But without further ado, let's start the video off right with Avatar Aang versus Korra. Now, when it comes to a hypothetical matchup between Aang and Korra, there are multiple things that Aang has going for him that give him a significant advantage. This being his agility, his mastery over airbending, and his seismic sense. Now, his mastery over airbending gives him unparalleled nimbleness that would allow him to maneuver over the battlefield with remarkable speed and precision. This would make it very challenging for Korra to actually keep up. And unlike Lin or Su Yin, who use seismic sense but it's impeded by their footwear, Aang doesn't have that same restriction as he doesn't really wear footwear, at least not in his season 3 attire. That would mean he'd be able to much more easily predict Korra's movements, as sight is no longer an issue and he's much more one with the element of earth. As well, Aang does have quite a bit of strategic versatility. This mostly stems from his usage of all 4 elements as the Avatar, which amplifies his combat prowess. We see this with Korra, as Korra does struggle to keep up with Korra when she's at her best. This ability to seamlessly transition between offense and defense could allow him to exploit Korra's only usage of earth and metal bending, specifically mainly metal bending. Overall, I think there's too many things going for Avatar Aang for him to not win this fight. So in my personal opinion, the victor of this round goes to Avatar Aang. But how will he do against his next opponent, Zahir? Okay, now before people start raising their pitchforks at me, I know putting Zahir below Amon is very controversial, but honestly, between the two of them, I think it could go either way. But the reason I'm putting Zahir here is I'm unconvinced that Zahir could reliably overpower Amon's bloodbending. But enough about Amon versus Zahir. How about Aang versus Zahir? Now, if this is Zahir prior to him being able to fly, then I don't think Zahir has even the slightest chance of beating Avatar Aang. I mean, Tenzin is probably the best representation of how that fight would go, except I don't think Aang would put in nearly as much offense, as he's not an offensive fighter. However, if we add Zahir's flight into the mix, then it gets more tricky. Zahir's flight gives him a level of mobility that Aang only really has access to in the Avatar state. And obviously in the Avatar state, Aang could absolutely beat Zahir, there's no question in my mind, but could base Aang. And I'm gonna say, maybe? It's a bit of a toss-up, honestly, as I can see it going either way, with Zahir having a much more aggressive bending style, coupled with his omnidirectional movement. It would provide him a much more mobility and be very difficult to hit him. However, unlike Zahir, Aang does have more options. And for those of you who screamed, but Zahir nearly beat Avatar Korra in her Avatar state, that was circumstantial. The issue was not only was Korra poisoned and it was killing her, but it also made her go berserk and not able to strategize. And if you remember, very importantly, Zahir was on the back foot for almost that entire fight, basically having to play defensively until Korra was weak enough from the poison for him to try and asphyxiate her. So trying to use that as a way for Zahir to win this fight is just not it and not viable. So honestly, in my opinion, I give the slight edge to Aang here, but either way, it's probably gonna be a high, maybe extreme diff fight. However, Amon, on the other hand, is a very different story. Now, when it comes to Avatar Aang versus Amon, Aang is going to have one gigantic problem to face here. That is Amon's bloodbending. As we saw with Hama, Aang cannot overpower bloodbending with his physicality alone, even as an adult. That means the only way he's going to be able to counter Amon's bloodbending is with the Avatar state. That is the only possible way for Aang to beat Amon, because without it, he's basically screwed. Now for those who say, oh, Aang can use waterbending like Katara. Well, again, we already saw that his waterbending didn't mean anything against Hama, who was able to fully take control of Aang's body. But then what if Amon doesn't use bloodbending? How would the fight go? Well, Amon is very acrobatic, kind of like Ty Lee in a sense, and as well, he is a master waterbender. But I don't think either of those would matter too much, as Aang has fought the likes of Azula to a standstill, and even bested her in season 2, who should be just as good at acrobatics as Amon, potentially better, since she has some very good acrobatics feats like fighting the Kyoshi warriors all at once. So that means Aang could outlast Amon, or he might be able to hit him enough to weaken him to take away his bending. But as I said before, that's if Amon doesn't use his blood bending. But now we get to the most controversial matchup. Unalaq versus Aang. Here we go. Unalaq versus Aang. Now the issue with Unalaq versus Aang is that we cannot really scale Unalaq to Korra. Here's why. During most of the fight, Unalaq was, for a lack of a better word, on the back foot. Korra consistently in her avatar state would overpower Unalaq, with one weird exception when they locked water tentacles. But that one feat does not inherently mean that he is like stronger than Korra and on her level. But just because we can't scale him to Korra does not mean he wasn't relative to her in some aspect. Despite being on the back foot for most of the fight, he was able to fight somewhat relative to her, meaning that his avatar state in terms of raw power should be above Aang's avatar state, or if you want to lowball him, they should be relative. Now, some people may argue about Korra being stronger than Aang, however, it is very blatant that even after losing her past lives, she should still be stronger than Avatar Aang even when comparing their avatar states. This is reiterated by the writers themselves and even implied in the series. But then if Aang is going to struggle with Unalaq physically, how would he actually go about beating Unalaq? Well, Aang has a very different fighting style than Korra, preferring evasion as an air nomad, meaning there's a good chance Aang would not fall for the same traps as Korra, like getting Rava detached from her spirit. However, that does not mean I think Aang wins reliably. But on the same token, I don't think Unalaq wins reliably. I think for both of them, it could go either way. But no matter which way the fight goes, I think it's going to be a high to potentially extreme diff fight. And it's probably a 50-50. Basically dead even. But again, that's just my opinion. Thank you all for watching. And if again, you want to see the counterpart of this video of could Korra survive The Last Airbender, then let me know by commenting your thoughts down below, liking, and subscribing to the video. And until we meet again, good luck in your power scaling endeavors.